She was the billionaire's only daughter, born mute, never hearing the sound of her own voice. But one night, after drinking a strange glowing liquid, something impossible happened. She spoke. And what her voice could do next would change everything. The morning was silent, except for the faint hum of the city below the towering mansion that belonged to one of the wealthiest men in the country. Inside that mansion, behind walls of marble and gold, there lived a girl who had everything money could buy. Designer clothes, glittering jewelry, the best tutors, the most expensive toys, and yet she carried a silence that no wealth could break. Her name was Alina, the only daughter of billionaire Raymond Carter, a man who could command industries, governments, and entire empires with his influence. But when it came to his daughter, he was powerless, because Alina had been mute since birth. Doctors from all over the world had been flown in. Neurologists, speech therapists, alternative healers. Everyone tried and failed. Some claimed her voice box was fine. Others said it was psychological. But no treatment, no medicine, no therapy ever worked. She had grown into a young woman of 20, graceful and intelligent, with eyes that spoke volumes, but lips that had never uttered a single sound. And though her father loved her deeply, the silence weighed on him more than all the burdens of his empire. He would give away his billions if only he could hear his daughter say "Papa" once. Alina herself had accepted her fate with quiet dignity. But inside, she carried a longing so deep it sometimes felt like an ache in her chest. She wanted to laugh out loud, to sing, to scream, to whisper secrets, to tell her father she loved him. But the silence had become her prison. People in her life often treated her as fragile, as incomplete. Suitors came and left, unable to see beyond her muteness. Friends drifted away, not knowing how to bond with someone who could not speak. And yet, Alina was no weak girl. She had strength, a mind sharp as glass, and a heart full of dreams. She loved reading old books, especially about myths, magic, and ancient remedies. There was something about hidden secrets of the world that called out to her, as though her silence was linked to a mystery waiting to be unraveled. One evening, during a grand party her father hosted for world leaders and businessmen, Alina wandered away from the glittering ballroom. She had grown used to being a beautiful ornament at such events, admired for her looks but pitied for her condition. Tired of the polite smiles and whispered sympathies, she slipped away through a side corridor, her satin dress brushing against the marble floor. She ended up in the old wine cellar, a place she had visited only once as a child. But tonight, something unusual caught her eye. In the farthest corner, behind dusty bottles of wine, stood a small crystal vial filled with a glowing liquid. It shimmered faintly, like it held moonlight inside. Her heart skipped. It didn't belong with the wine. The vial looked ancient, with strange inscriptions carved on the glass. Alina picked it up, turning it carefully in her hand, her pulse quickening. It was cool to the touch, but she felt an odd warmth spread through her fingers. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Something about it was calling her, almost whispering, though no sound reached her ears. A pull, like destiny itself. She thought about her years of silence, about the loneliness, about the endless doctors who had failed. What if this was something else? Something beyond science? Her rational mind argued it was dangerous. But her heart, desperate and hungry for hope, said otherwise. She uncorked the vial. A faint aroma filled the air, sweet, sharp, almost like crushed flowers mixed with rain. Without allowing herself to think further, she raised it to her lips and drank. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, a fire ran through her veins. It was not painful, but overwhelming, like 1,000 sparks dancing in her blood. Her vision blurred, her knees weakened, and she grabbed the wall for support. The world seemed to tilt, and a strange hum filled her ears, a sound she had never experienced before. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath caught, and suddenly she gasped. It was a sound. A real, audible gasp. Her eyes widened in shock as she clutched her throat. She tried again, this time forcing air through her vocal cords, and a broken, raspy sound escaped her lips. She covered her mouth, trembling. For the first time in 20 years, Alina had made a sound. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried again. Ah! The syllable was weak, but it was there. Real. Alive. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing silently at first, then letting out choked, half-formed sounds. She wanted to scream, to call her father, to shout to the heavens that the impossible had happened. Her whole body shook as she realized the truth. Something in that mysterious liquid had unlocked what doctors and billions of dollars could not. But as her initial shock faded, a new sensation crept over her. A heaviness in her chest, a tingling in her hands, as though the liquid was still working inside her. And then, something even stranger happened. The shadows in the cellar seemed to shift. For a moment, she thought she saw figures move in the corners, faint outlines of shapes that didn't belong to this world. She blinked hard, but they were gone. Her heart hammered. What exactly had she just drunk? Was this miracle also a curse? And that was when she heard footsteps above. The partygoers laughing, the music playing, her father's booming voice entertaining his guests. She pressed a hand to her throat, tears streaming down her face, and whispered one broken word, trembling and raw. Papa! It was weak, fragile, but it was real. The first word of her life had finally been spoken. Alina sat on the cold floor of the cellar, her heart racing as if it might burst through her chest. The word she had just spoken still echoed in her mind. Papa. It was barely a whisper, fragile and trembling, but it was hers, her voice, something she had believed she would never have. She pressed her palms against her throat, feeling the vibrations still humming there, as though the liquid had awakened something ancient and powerful inside her. The tears kept rolling down her cheeks, and for a moment she allowed herself to sob out loud, the strange, broken cries filling the empty cellar. To anyone else, they would have sounded rough, almost painful. But to her, they were the most beautiful sounds in the world. She wanted to run upstairs, to throw herself into her father's arms, to tell him the impossible had happened. But another thought froze her. How would she explain? She had no idea what the glowing liquid was, where it had come from, or why it had been hidden in the cellar. What if it was dangerous? What if her voice vanished again as suddenly as it came? Or worse, what if this new gift came with a price? She bit her lip, torn between joy and fear. Still trembling, Alina clutched the empty vial in her hand. She needed to know its origin. She needed answers. But before she could gather her thoughts, a soft creak broke the silence. Someone was in the cellar. She quickly shoved the vial into the folds of her dress and wiped her tears. From the shadows emerged one of the household's oldest staff members, Mrs. Hargrove, the caretaker who had served her since childhood. The elderly woman's sharp eyes caught Alina crouched on the floor, her cheeks wet. She hurried forward, whispering with concern. "My dear, what are you doing down here? You'll catch a chill." Alina opened her mouth instinctively, but only a hoarse sound came out. Mrs. Hargrove froze, her eyes widening as she realized what she had just heard. "Alina," she whispered, almost dropping the tray of glasses she had been carrying. You made a sound." Alina's tears returned, but this time she did not hide them. She gripped Mrs. Hargrove's hands and tried again. "Pa," the word cracked, but it was real. The old woman gasped, her hands trembling. "Oh my heavens! After all these years, you can speak?" Alina nodded, unable to contain her sobs. The caretaker hugged her tightly, whispering prayers of gratitude. But then, as the excitement softened, Mrs. Hargrove's face darkened with a strange seriousness. "Child, what happened? Did you drink something?" Alina froze, her fingers tightening around the hidden vial. She wanted to explain, but feared the consequences. Still, the knowing look in the old woman's eyes made her realize Mrs. Hargrove already suspected. Before Alina could respond, voices echoed from upstairs. The party was ending. Guests were leaving, and soon her father would come looking for her. Panic surged through her. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She wanted her first words to her father to be perfect, not broken and rasping. She wanted to understand what had happened before revealing her miracle. So she begged Mrs. Hargrove with her eyes, pressing a finger against her lips. The old woman nodded silently, though worry lingered in her gaze. That night, long after the mansion grew quiet and the lights dimmed, Alina lay awake in her bed. She whispered to herself in the dark, practicing sounds, shaping words. At first, her voice cracked and wavered like a newborn bird learning to sing. But gradually it grew stronger, clearer. Each sound brought her tears of joy. She whispered her name, then her father's, then simple words like yes and no. She even laughed, softly, awkwardly, but it was a laugh nonetheless. For hours she filled her room with her newfound voice, marveling at the miracle. Yet alongside her happiness lurked unease. As the moonlight streamed through her window, she noticed something strange. Shadows in the corners of her room seemed to twist unnaturally, darker than they should be. She rubbed her eyes, but the distortion lingered. And then, faintly, she thought she heard whispers, soft, indecipherable voices curling at the edge of her hearing. She froze, clutching the blanket. Was it her imagination? Or had the liquid not only given her a voice, but also opened a door to something unseen? The next morning, Alina made her way to the library where her father often spent his mornings. Raymond Carter, dressed in his usual tailored suit, sat at a massive oak desk, reading stock reports. His stern face softened when he saw his daughter enter. "Good morning, Princess," he said warmly as always. Alina stood there, her heart pounding. This was the moment she had dreamed of her entire life. The moment she would finally speak to him. She opened her mouth, her throat tightening with nerves. But just as she was about to say, "Papa," she saw a flicker in the corner of her eye. A shadow moved across the bookshelf, though there was no one there. Her breath caught, and the words stuck in her throat. Raymond noticed her trembling. He rose quickly, concern etched on his face. "Alina, are you all right?" She forced a smile, shaking her head as if to say she was fine, though her chest ached with disappointment. She wasn't ready to reveal her secret, not with these strange visions haunting her. Later that day, Alina returned to the cellar, determined to search for clues about the mysterious vial. She combed through shelves, boxes, and crates until her fingers brushed against a leather-bound book tucked away behind old bottles. Pulling it out, she blew off the dust and opened it. Her eyes widened. Inside were handwritten notes, symbols, and sketches of strange plants and potions. It looked ancient, possibly belonging to someone long before her father owned the mansion. And on one of the pages, she found a drawing of the exact crystal vial she had drunk from, glowing with the same light. The notes were faded, but she could decipher some words. Voice, sacrifice, shadows awakened. Her hands shook as she traced the words. The liquid had given her a voice, yes. But what was the sacrifice? And what were the shadows that seemed to follow her now? That night, as she clutched the book to her chest, she realized her story was only beginning. She had gained her voice, but at what cost? The leather-bound book trembled in Alina's hands as she turned its brittle pages. Strange sketches of plants she had never seen before filled the margins, their names written in languages she couldn't understand. But scattered among them were words she did recognize, words written in bold strokes. The elixir of voice, the gift of sound, and then, ominously, the shadow's claim. Her stomach twisted as she traced the ink with her fingertip. Had she stumbled upon something far more dangerous than a cure? Sleep was impossible that night. Each time she closed her eyes, the whispers returned, faint voices curling around her ears like smoke. Sometimes she thought they were calling her name. Other times, they spoke in languages she had never heard. And when she dared to whisper aloud to test her voice, the whispers seemed to grow louder, as though answering her. She hugged her knees under the blanket, shivering, the weight of both wonder and dread pressing down on her. She had the gift she had prayed for her entire life, yet it came tangled with something dark. The next morning, she decided she couldn't face this alone anymore. She needed to confide in someone, and the only person she trusted with her secret besides Mrs. Hargrove was her childhood friend, Ethan. Ethan was the son of one of her father's business partners, but unlike the others who saw her as the silent daughter of a billionaire, Ethan had always treated her as a person, not a condition. He had learned to read her expressions, her gestures, even her written notes, and over the years he had become her safe place. She invited him to the mansion's garden under the excuse of wanting to show him something new she had painted. When Ethan arrived, tall and kind-eyed as ever, she felt her pulse quicken. For a moment, she almost lost her nerve, but then she forced herself to breathe and tried. Ethan. His name came out hoarse, trembling, but clear enough to hear. Ethan froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Alina! You just spoke. His voice cracked with shock. She nodded, tears brimming. I can talk, she whispered, her voice breaking halfway but still there. Ethan staggered back, running his hands through his hair. This is impossible. How? When? Alina, what happened? She told him everything, or as much as she could, about the cellar, the vial, the liquid, and the sudden miracle. Ethan listened, his face shifting from wonder to fear. Alina, you don't know what that was. It could have been poison or worse. He glanced around the garden nervously, lowering his voice. Do you realize what this means? If anyone finds out, they'll come after it. Something like that? People would kill to get their hands on it. Her throat tightened. She hadn't thought of that. To the world, the Carter family was already a magnet for greed and envy. If word spread about a potion that could restore a voice, or maybe more, her life would never be safe again. She clutched Ethan's hand, whispering, "Don't tell." He nodded firmly. Never. But, Alina, we need to figure out what's happening to you. Miracles don't come free. That night, Alina returned to the old book, searching for answers. With Ethan's help, they deciphered more fragments. The potion was indeed called the elixir of voice, brewed from rare herbs said to grow only under moonlight and mixed with waters drawn from hidden springs. But alongside its promise of granting sound to the voiceless, there were warnings written in shaky handwriting. Beware the whispers. Every gift demands a price. The shadows follow the awakened. Her hands shook as she read. The words seemed to pulse on the page, as if alive. Ethan tried to comfort her, but even he couldn't hide his unease. We'll figure it out, he whispered. You're not alone in this. His words calmed her for the moment, but deep down, Alina knew something bigger was coming. Over the next few days, her voice grew stronger. She practiced in secret, whispering poetry, singing softly, and even laughing without fear. For the first time, she felt human in a way she had never experienced. But with each passing night, the shadows grew darker. In her bedroom, corners seemed to writhe with shapes that dissolved when she stared directly at them. In the hallways, she swore she heard footsteps behind her, though no one was there. The whispers became clearer too, sometimes urging her, sometimes warning her. One evening, as she stood before her mirror, practicing to say, "I love you, Papa," her reflection suddenly moved differently from her. She froze, her heart thundering as the mirrored version of herself tilted its head with a slow, eerie smile. Alina stumbled back, a scream tearing from her throat. A real, loud scream that echoed through the mansion. But when she blinked, Her reflection was normal again, trembling and wide-eyed just like her. Her father burst into the room seconds later, his face pale with panic. "Alina, I heard you. Did you scream?" He stopped stunned, realizing he had just heard his daughter's voice for the first time. His eyes filled with tears, his hands trembling as he stepped closer. You spoke." Alina's lips quivered. This was the moment she had longed for her entire life, but it was tangled with terror. Still, she forced herself to meet his gaze and whispered, "Papa." Raymond collapsed into her arms, sobbing like a child. "My baby, my miracle." For a few minutes, there was nothing but their tears and laughter, father and daughter finally bound by sound. It was the happiest moment of their lives. But as they held each other, Alina's gaze drifted past his shoulder. In the corner of the room, the shadows thickened, forming the outline of something tall, thin, and watching. She bit her lip, swallowing her fear, and held her father tighter. She had her voice at last, but something else had awakened with it, and it was only getting stronger. The days that followed should have been the happiest of Alina's life. Her father walked around the mansion with tears in his eyes, introducing her proudly to every guest, every friend, every employee, telling them that his miracle child had spoken at last. Alina herself marveled at every sound she made. The trill of her laughter, the warmth of her whispered thank yous, the sweetness of saying her own name aloud. She would stay awake at night just to hear herself repeat words she had written silently for years. To anyone looking from the outside, it seemed as though her world had finally been healed. But beneath the glow of joy, darkness was stirring like a storm cloud. The whispers never stopped. At first, they came only at night, curling around her like faint echoes. But soon, they followed her into the day, a constant murmur at the edge of her hearing. Sometimes they were harmless, like fragments of conversations she couldn't understand. Other times, they grew sharper, commanding. "Come to us," they hissed. "Your voice is ours." She tried to drown them out by speaking louder, by singing. But the more she used her voice, the louder the whispers grew. Ethan was the only one she confided in. They would sit together in the library with the old leather-bound books spread between them, searching desperately for answers. "It says here the elixir awakens dormant threads of sound," Ethan muttered, scanning the faded pages. "But there's something else, something about balance. Alina, I think your voice came at a cost, and the shadows you keep seeing, they're tied to that cost." Alina's hands trembled as she whispered, What if I lose it? What if they take my voice back?" The fear in her tone was unmistakable. She had waited her whole life for this gift, and the thought of losing it was unbearable. Ethan squeezed her hand firmly. "Then we'll fight. We'll figure it out before it comes to that." But fate was moving faster than either of them realized. One evening, her father invited powerful politicians and tycoons to celebrate Alina's newfound voice. She was seated at the long dining table, smiling shyly as everyone applauded her when she said a few words of gratitude. For the first time, she felt like she belonged in a room full of people, no longer the silent girl who had been pitted her entire life. But as she raised her glass to thank them, she caught sight of the shadows creeping along the edges of the chandelier's light, crawling across the walls like smoke. She froze, her hand trembling. No one else seemed to notice. The shadows twisted and formed shapes, faces with hollow eyes, mouths whispering without sound. Her throat went dry, and the words caught in her mouth. Her father noticed her sudden silence. "Alina, are you all right?" he asked in front of the guests. She forced a shaky smile and nodded, managing to croak, "Yes, Papa." But inside, she felt the whispers pounding louder than the clinking of glasses and the chatter around her. Later that night, she stood alone in the garden, the moon casting silver light on the flowers. She whispered softly to herself, testing her voice. "It's mine," she told herself firmly. This voice is mine. But as soon as the words left her lips, the air grew colder, and from the hedges emerged the shifting shadows, darker than night. This time, they didn't just linger. They formed into figures. Tall, thin beings with hollow eyes that glowed faintly, staring at her as though she were prey. Alina stumbled back, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. And for the first time, the whispers answered her clearly, their voices layered and echoing. "We are the echoes. The voice you carry is not yours alone. Every sound you make feeds us." Her breath caught in her throat. "No, this is my gift, my miracle." The figures drifted closer, their forms flickering like smoke in the wind. "Every gift demands a price. The more you speak, the stronger we become. Soon, your voice will not belong to you, but to us." Alina's knees weakened. She wanted to scream for help, but fear held her silent. Just then, Ethan appeared, rushing into the garden after noticing her absence. When he saw her pale face and the strange coldness that seemed to hang in the air, he grabbed her arm. "Alina, what's happening?" The shadows hissed and vanished, melting into the night as though they had never been there. Alina clutched Ethan, trembling. "They spoke to me," she whispered urgently. They said my voice isn't mine, that it's theirs." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then we need to stop them. There has to be something in that book, some way to break their hold." But the days that followed only made things worse. The more Alina used her voice, the stronger the shadows became. Servants in the mansion began complaining of strange chills, of hearing whispers at night. Lights flickered, mirrors cracked without reason, and once, her father himself swore he saw a dark figure at the edge of his office. Alina lived in constant fear, torn between the joy of finally speaking and the terror of what her gift was awakening. One night, as she sat with Ethan in the library, the book opened before them. Her voice broke with desperation. What if I give it back? What if that's the only way to stop them?" Ethan grabbed her shoulders, his eyes fierce. "No! Alina, you've waited your whole life for this. We'll find another way. You can't lose your voice now." But deep down, Alina feared the truth. Maybe the elixir had never been meant to give without taking. Maybe her miracle was nothing more than a trap. And as the mansion groaned under the weight of unseen forces, as whispers curled louder around her ears, she realized the choice ahead of her would not just determine her voice, but her very soul. The mansion no longer felt like home. Every corner seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Every flicker of light threatened to reveal the whispering shadows. Alina, once the silent girl, was now the center of a battle between worlds she barely understood. Her voice had given her joy, love, and connection. But it had also opened a door to something dark, something that refused to let her go. Ethan never left her side. Night after night, they pored over the old leather-bound book, searching for a way to undo what had been done. Finally, buried deep in the final pages, they found something. A ritual. The writing was faint, almost erased with time, but the meaning was clear enough. The elixir of voice had bound her to the echoes, but there was a way to sever that bond. Sacrifice. The words chilled her as Ethan read them aloud. The voice given must be surrendered, or the shadows will claim the soul. Alina's throat tightened. "So, if I give it back, they'll disappear?" Ethan looked at her with sorrow in his eyes. "Yes, but it means losing your voice forever." Her heart cracked at the thought. She had just begun to live, to laugh, to tell her father she loved him, to hear her own name on her lips. And now, she was being asked to surrender it all. She buried her face in her hands, whispering brokenly, "It's not fair." The choice weighed on her for days. Her father beamed with pride every time she spoke, showering her with affection as though making up for all the years of silence. At night, though, when she lay awake, She heard the echoes circling closer, their whispers no longer distant but sharp, urgent. Speak more. Feed us. Soon you will be ours. One evening, as she dined with her father, the lights in the chandelier flickered violently. The air turned ice cold, and then, right before Raymond's eyes, the shadows poured into the room, forming tall, thin figures with glowing hollow eyes. The echoes had come, visible now to all. Servants screamed and fled, dishes shattered to the floor, and Raymond clutched his daughter protectively. "What is this?" he cried. "What's happening to us?" Alina knew the truth. This was the price. The echoes had grown too strong, and now they wanted more than her voice. They wanted her soul. Ethan rushed in with the old book clutched to his chest, shouting, "Alina, it's now or never." The echoes stretched their arms, their voices hissing like 1,000 serpents. "Choose, child. Keep your voice, and you belong to us. Or give it up, and we vanish." Tears streamed down Alina's face. She looked at her father, who held her tightly, his eyes wide with fear and love. She wanted so badly to keep speaking to him, to keep hearing the words she had dreamed of saying all her life. But then she saw the terror in his eyes, the way the shadows loomed over him, over Ethan, over the home she loved. And she realized the truth. Her voice was not just hers anymore. It was a chain binding everyone she loved to danger. Her lips trembled as she whispered the hardest words she had ever spoken. "I give it back." The echoes froze. The air crackled. Their hollow eyes flared, and a scream unlike anything human ripped through the mansion. The shadows twisted violently, collapsing into themselves like smoke pulled into a void. Alina felt the fire in her throat extinguish, her voice shattering inside her like glass. She opened her mouth to cry out, but no sound came. The gift was gone. Silence fell heavy and complete. The mansion stopped trembling. The air warmed again. The echoes had vanished. Raymond held his daughter, trembling with relief and heartbreak. "No, no, my sweet girl, not again." His tears soaked her hair as he rocked her gently, as though she were still a child. Ethan knelt beside them, his hand resting on hers. "You saved us all," he whispered softly, though she could no longer hear the sound of his words. Alina's heart ached with loss, but as she looked into her father's tear-filled eyes, she realized something important. She no longer needed a voice to be heard. She had shown strength greater than words, love deeper than sound. And as her father held her tightly, whispering, "I love you no matter what," she knew he finally understood. Her silence was not her weakness. It was her sacrifice, her power. In the days that followed, the mansion returned to peace. The servants spoke of the strange night only in hushed whispers, and her father swore to protect her even more fiercely than before. Ethan stayed by her side, never once treating her as broken, always reminding her that her soul was louder than any voice. And Alina, though mute once more, carried herself differently now. She had tasted the sweetness of sound, yes, but she had also learned something greater. That true strength was not in the words spoken, but in the choices made. Her silence was no longer her prison. It was her legacy. And somewhere in the shadows of memory, faint but proud, she knew the echoes would never return. For she had given up the one thing they craved most, and in that sacrifice, she had won her freedom. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more mysterious and powerful stories. Your support inspires us to keep creating amazing content just for you.